Hi, this is lesson 8.4. We're multiplying and dividing rational functions. So the big question here is, how do you use factoring to multiply and divide rational functions? So the first part of our frame is just going to be reviewing factoring a little. So our is about statement, this frame, is about learning how to simplify rational functions by using factoring. So we use our factoring to simplify rational functions. Our so what, we'll fill it in right now so that we don't miss it. Our so what is factor. Factor. You can only cancel out factors. So factor, you can only cancel factors. Okay, so let's do our first column. So just a little bit of review of factoring. This should be factoring from Algebra 1A, or actually 1B that you did, and you also did factoring in Algebra 2A. So this is really x times x. And you've got to think, what can you multiply to get negative 24 that adds up? It's got to add up to 5. So what multiplies to get negative 24? That adds to positive 5. And your possible options are 8 and 3. You could also do 6 and 4, but if I make one of them negative, it's not going to add up to 5. 2 and 12, if I make one of them negative, it won't add up to 5. But 8 and 3, if I make one of those negative, it'll add up to positive 5, and that would be a negative 3. 8 plus negative 3 is positive 5. So my factor is x plus 8 times x minus 3. And you can have that in the other order too. You could say x minus 3 times x plus 8. Number 2, factor. Well, we've got to look. First of all, these are both even, so that's a key right there that you're going to have a number that goes into them. So what you really have to do is just practice and see what can you divide into both 144 and 324. And if you do that, you'll find that 36 goes into both of them. So we're going to take out a 36. Then if you look at your x's, this is x to the 5th and this is x to the 3rd. So I can take out x to the 3rd. So it's 36x to the 3rd. And now we've got to figure out what would be left over. So if you do 144 divided by 36, that's going to give you 4. And x to the 5th, if I take x to the 3rd out, that'd give me x squared. Minus 324 x to the 3rd divided by 36 x to the 3rd. Well, my x to the 3rds cancel, so 324 divided by 36, that would leave me with 9. Now, this isn't factored all the way, and I know that because this is a perfect square, and this is a perfect square. These are separated by a minus sign, so this is the difference of two squares. So this first one is really 2x times 2x, and this last is negative 3 times positive 3. So this factors, I should put equals, 36 times x to the 3rd times the quantity 2x minus 3 times the quantity 2x plus 3. And it is now factored all the way. Number 3 here. We want to find our factors that multiply to give you a times c and that add up to negative 17. So I'm going to make a little table. A c is 6 times 5, that's positive 30. And then b, what they add up to, is negative 17. So we need to multiply to give 30 and add up to negative 17. And my two factors that do that are negative 15 and negative 2. So negative 15 and negative 2, those are my two factors. And here's the trick. Now there's a few different ways that you could do this, but this is the way that I'm going to do it. If I do negative 15 and negative 2, and I'm going to divide them both by my a, so divide them both by 6. When I reduce that, it will give me the two pieces of my two factors. So my goal is to have it look like this. I have something times x and something times x here. So negative 15 divided by 6, well, if you divide those both by 3, that's negative 5 over 2. And if you divide this one by 2, because I'm just reducing, that's negative 1 over 3. So here are my two pairs, negative 5 over 2 and negative 1 over 3. So the bottom number goes first, so 2x, and then my minus 5. Okay, so all I did was take this 2 and put it in front of the x, and then this negative 5, and it goes back behind it. Now I'm going to take this 3 and put it in front of this x, and this minus 1 is going to come back behind it. And this is factoring using the SNP method, which should be pretty easy. You should have learned to factor in Algebra 2A. If it's something that you're still struggling with, come in and see me, and we will work on factoring together after class. Okay, so for this, we're first going to factor out both the top and bottom, and then the second thing we're going to do is cross out the common expressions. So we've got to remember that for 4, 5, and 6 here. So let's look at the top. If I factor this, you've got to think, what can you multiply together that multiplies to give you 10 that adds up to 7? Well, positive 5 and positive 2. So this is x plus 5 times x plus 2. In my bottom, this is a perfect square, this is a perfect square, and they're separated by a minus sign. So this is the difference of two squares. So this is going to factor out into x's in both the first spots, because the square root of x squared is x. 1 plus and 1 minus, and the square root of 4 is 2. So I've got a 2 and a 2. Okay. So first I factored both the top and bottom. Now I want to cancel out the common factors. So these two cancel. So I am left with x plus 5 over x minus 2, and that's my answer. So let's look at this next one. We want to factor out the top and the bottom first. What can I multiply to get negative 15 that adds up to negative 2? Well, that'd be negative 5 and positive 3. So x minus 5 times x plus 3. Let's factor the bottom as well. What can you multiply to get positive 3 that adds up to positive 4? That's 3 and 1, so it's x plus 3 times x plus 1. Now let's do our second step and cancel out our common factors, and those two are the same. So my answer is x minus 5 over x plus 1. And there's my answer. Let's look at the next problem here. Factor the top and bottom again. Now the top, both of these terms have an x in common, so I'm going to take that x out first. So I've got x times the quantity. X to the third divided by x is x squared, minus 9x, taking an x out is 9. Oop, right away I notice I've got an x squared, that's a perfect squared, a minus sign, and then 9 is another perfect square. So I'm going to be able to factor this a little bit more, and I'll do that in the next step. But let's look at the bottom first. What can you multiply to get, oh, wait a second, these three terms all have x's in them. We need to take those x's out before we can do anything. So I'm going to take my x out. The first term is left over with x squared, minus the second term is left with 4x, and the last term is left with just a plus 3. Okay, well now we pulled out our common x right there. Now you should notice right away they're the same. So those, since we noticed we've got the same thing, those are going to cancel. We're just going to cancel them right now. Let's do a little bit more factoring. X squared minus 9. Well, that simplifies into x plus 3 times x minus 3, because that's a perfect square. That's a difference of two squares. Now for the bottom, what can you multiply to get positive 3 that adds up to negative 1? Well, that would be a negative 3 and a negative 1. So this is over x minus 3 times x minus 1. Now we're going to cancel out our common factors. It's x minus 3. And that leaves us with x plus 3 over x minus 1. So we're factoring first, the top and bottom, and then we're canceling out what they have in common, and that leaves us with our simplified expression. Let's look at the other side of your frame now. Okay, so we're going to multiply and divide rational functions here using our factoring. So let's look at the first. We need to factor the top and bottom of both expressions, and you need to remember, factor the numerators and denominators, combine the two expressions, then cancel out the common terms from the top and bottom, and simplify. So we're going to do these things, all of them. We're going to factor first. So if I factor the top, I'm going to start by factoring this. They both have a 2 and they both have an x. So I'm going to pull out the 2x. So I'm left here with 2x times, if I take 2x out of this, I'm left with just an x. If I take 2x out of here, I'm left with a 2. So I'm left with x plus 2. The bottom, what can I multiply to get negative 12? That adds up to negative 4. Well, that would be a negative 6. So x minus 6 and a positive 2 times x plus 2. Times, okay, let's factor the second one. What can you multiply to get positive 18? That adds up to negative 9. Well, that would be negative 6 and negative 3. So this is x minus 6 times x minus 3. And the bottom will stay 2x here. So we've done our first thing. We've factored the numerators and denominators. Combine the two expressions. This is all multiplying, so I can really just make this into one big fraction. Next, we want to cancel out the common terms from the top and bottom. So let's look at what we have in common. I have a 2x on the top and the bottom, so they'll cancel. I have an x plus 2 on the top and bottom. They cancel. And I have an x minus 6 on the top and bottom. They both cancel. So I'm left with just that x minus 3 on the top. So that's my answer. Let's look at this next example. Let's follow our steps again. We first have to start with factoring. So if I factor this, the top, I can't factor anything out here. The bottom, x squared minus 9, well, this is the difference of two squares because they're both perfect squares. So my top stays negative 2x squared over, and the bottom factors to x plus 3 times x minus 3. Now I have times this. This is not a fraction, but it would be on the top if I made it into a fraction. So I'm just going to put it on the top with this here. So I'm going to extend this, and I'm going to say times, and if I factor that, what can I multiply to get 9? That adds up to positive 6. Well, that's a 3 and 3, so it's times x plus 3 times x plus 3. Let's cross out what we have in common. So I've got a positive 3 on the bottom. I have 2 plus x plus 3's on the top. You can't cancel them both. You can only cancel one of them out. So now I'm left with negative 2x squared times the quantity x plus 3 on the top, and on the bottom I'm left with x minus 3. And as I said before, you cannot leave this top in this form. You could leave the bottom like this, but the top you can't leave like that. You've got to simplify it. So let's just distribute. Negative 2x squared times x is negative 2x to the third. Negative 2x squared times a positive 3 is minus 6x squared, and the bottom stays x minus 3. So here's our answer. Let's factor the top and bottom of this one first of all. So for the first one, both terms have a 6 in the numbers that I can take out, and they both have an x that I can take out as well. So I'm going to take a 6x out of both terms. So if I take a 6x out, the first term I'm left with just an x plus 18 divided by that 6 that I'm going to take out is 3. And I took the x out as well, so this is just x plus 3. The bottom, what can I multiply to get negative 6? That adds up to a positive 1. Well, that would be positive 3 and negative 2. So I'm left with x plus 3 times x minus 2 times, let's factor the top and bottom of the second one. What can I multiply to get negative 2 that adds up to negative 1? Well, that would be negative 2 times positive 1. So I've got x minus 2 times x plus 1. On the bottom here, what can I multiply to get negative 8? That adds up to negative 7. Well, that would be a negative 8 and a positive 1. So I'm left with x minus 8 times x plus 1. We're going to combine these since it's multiplying. I can just put them all together. Now let's cancel out what we have in common. I've got an x plus 3 on the top and bottom, so I'm going to cancel those both. X minus 2 on the top and bottom, I'll cancel those both. X plus 1 on the top and bottom, I'm going to cancel those both. So I am left with a 6x on the top, and on the bottom I'm left with x minus 8. And that is my simplified form. So those were some problems using multiplication. Now we're going to do a couple problems using division. So what you have to remember when we're doing division, so with these you've always got to watch for this sign in the middle and ask yourself, is it multiplying or dividing? Because it makes a difference. First, you've got to multiply the first expression by the reciprocal of the second expression. So you're going to flip the back fraction, then you're going to factor, and then you're going to multiply. Okay, so let's try and remember those steps, and I'm going to write them down because it may make it a little easier. So we're going to flip the last fraction. The second thing we're going to do is factor. Then the third thing we're going to do is multiply. So let's do this. So I'm going to make this 3 over x plus 7 times, I'm going to flip this last one, x squared plus 6x minus 7 over 8x squared minus 8x. So I flipped my last fraction. Now I need to factor this. So it's the 3 can't be factored, x plus 7 can't be factored, times, let's factor this top one right here. What can you multiply to get negative 7 that adds up to positive 6? Well, that would be positive 7 and negative 1. So my top is x plus 7 times x minus 1. And on the bottom, what can I take out of both of these two terms? Right here, I can take an 8 out of both, and I can also take an x out of both. So if I factor that, I'm going to take out the 8x, and I'm left with x minus 1. Okay, so let's combine this so that we can multiply. Now that we have multiplying, we can just combine them into one big fraction. And let's do our multiplying. That just requires us to cancel out the common terms and simplify. So the top and bottom, well, this really should have parentheses. The top and bottom both have an x plus 7, so they cancel. We have an x minus 1 on both the top and bottom. Looking here, 3 over 8. They don't have a common factor, so we're going to keep it 3 over 8. So my final answer here is 3 over 8x, and that's the answer. I'm all set there. Well, let's look at this one. Again, you've always got to check what's your sign in the middle. What's your sign here? It's division. So we need to do our three things. We need to flip the fraction, the back fraction, change it to multiplying, we need to factor, and then we need to actually do our multiplying. So I'm going to rewrite this, x squared minus 1 over x minus 4 times, now this, if I made it a fraction, really it would be on the top. So I'm going to put it on the bottom here. So times x squared minus 2x plus 1. Now we need to factor this. So x squared minus 1, those are both perfect squares. This is the difference of two squares. So it's going to factor into x plus 1 times x minus 1. This is just a pattern you should get used to seeing. The bottom here, x minus 4, that doesn't factor at all, so I'm going to keep it x minus 4 times, I can't factor 1, so that stays the same. Here we're going to think, what can you multiply to get 1 that adds up to negative 2? So what can I multiply to get a positive 1 that adds up to negative 2 is going to be negative 1 times negative 1. So I've got x minus 1 times x minus 1. And since this is multiplying two fractions, we're just going to combine them because we multiply straight across. And now let's simplify what they have in common. They both have an x minus 1 on the top and bottom. And that's really the only thing that can cancel out. So my final answer is x plus 1 on the top. And on the bottom, I have x minus 4 times x minus 1. Now what you should remember, I have two factors on the bottom here, and it's okay to keep them like that. If this was on the top, you would want to simplify. But it's not on the top, it's on the bottom. So this is fine as the answer. Let's do our last problem on this page. So I see that I've got division, so I need to change it to multiplying and flip this last fraction. So let's do that. So I'm going to keep my first one, x minus 5, over the quantity 9x squared minus 18x. Change it to multiplying, and this last fraction will now be 2x squared minus 5x plus 2. What was on the bottom moves to the top. And the bottom is 2x squared minus 11x plus 5. So we flipped our top and bottom and changed it to multiplying. Now let's do a little factoring. This top we can't factor, so we'll keep it the same. The bottom we can take a 9x out of both terms. So my top stays x minus 5. On my bottom I'm going to take a 9x out of both terms. This first term, 9x squared divided by 9x, will just leave me with a plain x. And the second term, 18x, if I divide that by 9x, that would leave me with just a 2. So I have 9x times the quantity x minus 2 times, okay, let's factor our top and bottom here. So the top, I'm going to write this down here and give myself a little bit more room, 2x squared minus 5x plus 2. I'm going to do this because I see this first number is not a 1, so it might take just a little bit more to factor these. So I've got to think, what can I multiply to get my AC that's going to add up to my B? So A times C is positive 4, and I need it to add up to negative 5. So what can I multiply to get positive 4? That when I add it, I get a negative 5. Well, let me think here. Multiply to get positive 4, that adds up to negative 5. It's going to be a 4 and a 1, and they're both going to be negative. Okay, negative 4 times a negative 1 is positive 4. Negative 4 plus negative 1 is negative 5. So we've got that. We've got our two terms. So I'm going to take both of my two terms, I'm using the STIP method here, and divide them both by the A. So this reduces to negative 2 over 1. And the second one is already reduced. So my factored form of this, remember, this bottom number comes first before the x, and this comes second. This will come first in my second set, and this will come second. So I'm going to have a 1x minus 2 times the quantity 2x minus 1. So let's write that up here, and that will go on the top. So it's x minus 2 times the quantity 2x minus 1. Now I'm going to factor the bottom. I'm going to do it in just a different color because we're getting quite a bit on this page here. So now let's factor 2x squared minus 11x plus 5. So I need to multiply to get a times c. A times c is 10. Okay, and I needed to add up to b. So I needed to add up to negative 11. So negative 10 times negative 1. If I multiply that, I'll get positive 10, and it does indeed add up to negative 11. So I'm going to take both those two terms, negative 10 and negative 1, and I'm going to divide them by my a. So this one is already in reduced form. Okay, this one, I can divide them both by 2, and I get a negative 5 over 1. So my two factors that I get using the SNP method here, they're going to be, we've got 1 and minus 5, so it's going to be x minus 5. And then my other factor is going to be 2x minus 1. So I've got x minus 5 times 2x minus 1, and let's put that up here. So x minus 5 times 2x minus 1. Now let's cross out our common factors now that we've got all our simplifying done. This x minus 5 and x minus 5 will cancel out. 2x minus 1 and 2x minus 1 will cancel. X minus 2 and x minus 2 will cancel. So I'm just left with that 9x in the bottom. So since it's in the bottom, I've got to keep it in the bottom, and I have to put a 1 on the top to hold that spot. So my answer is 1 over 9x. So this is the end of these notes. Please make sure if you had any questions, anything that didn't make sense, that you start it so that we can talk about it and go over it in class tomorrow. Have a great day.